Welcome to LogosTV, Coptic Civilization Program. I'm Michael Saad. The episode today is about the Copts between Egypt and America. Thank you for watching, because today's episode will be 3 parts about Coptic civilization in Egypt and in America on the subtopic of the Copts themselves, their personal life, their community life, their church life, their identity. And great civilizations, rich civilizations, offer a lot for academic study. And there are so many research around the world and in Egypt about all aspects of Coptic civilization. And one of those aspects is the phenomena of 20th century and 21st century migration from Egypt to all corners of the world and forming the Coptic diaspora. Our guest today is Candace Lukasik, PhD candidate at University of California, Berkeley. Welcome, Candace.
Thank you, Dr. Michael.
I'm honored that you accepted my invitation to be a guest at our program, Coptic Civilization. And I remember with gratitude meeting you in November 2014 at the American Academy of Religion in San Diego, the annual conference. And you presented a paper, and it was good quality scholarship about the life of the Copts after the 2011 revolution. And since then, I have been following your research and your publications and your travels. Let me ask you first, but before my question, I wanted to tell the viewer that Candace has a unique perspective on the topic, because we always seek an outsider view of our civilization and its aspects and its spirituality and its different phenomena. And outsider and insider both complement each other. So Candace is a rare perspective, has a rare perspective in the sense that she's an insider, having adopted the Coptic Orthodoxy a few years ago, and she's also a kind of outsider because she was not a Copt until a few years ago, and she comes to the Coptic world with an independent mind, but also passion for both scholarship and spiritual fellowship. Welcome again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
What motivated you as a PhD student at University of California, Berkeley, in the Department of Anthropology, to choose a Coptology topic, the diaspora phenomena, for a topic for your dissertation?
So it's kind of a long journey. I got introduced to the Coptic community in 2007 when I did an Arabic program in Cairo. It was 6 weeks. Everybody always asks me how did I get interested in the Coptic community. And honestly, it was by coincidence that I applied for a scholarship for this 6-week Arabic program. And I really just wanted to see the pyramids, obviously, graduating high school at that time. And I ended up getting the scholarship, and I went to Cairo for 6 weeks. And one of the people on the program that I was very close with, her host family was Coptic. And I would go over to their apartment and have delicious food and also attend liturgy with them for the weekends that we had free. And I became really enthralled with the liturgy and also the community. It was something new for me. I grew up Catholic, and so it was a new type of Christianity that I'd never experienced before. And also Egypt captivated me as well. And so since that time, every summer in 2008, I was in Egypt for 4 months, and then in 2009, 2010, I went to AUC for a study abroad. And then I visited in 2011, and in 2012, 11-12, when I started my master's program at Columbia University, I started to get more academically interested in this community that I had become so close with. And at that time, my research was mainly focused on Copts inside of Egypt and Coptic youth after the revolution in 2011. I worked with organizations like the Maspero Youth Union, Shabab Maspero, and others. And then after that period of time when I started my PhD program at UC Berkeley in the fall of 2013, over time I became more interested in kind of in the diaspora and what was happening elsewhere when I would attend fellowship meetings at UC Berkeley for the Coptic organization on campus, or attend church nearby in Hayward, California. I started to realize that my interest in the Coptic community in Egypt was much wider than the national boundaries of Egypt. And so I started to develop my project around the diaspora more towards 2015, 2016. And since then, I've been focusing on that for my dissertation project.
So you know modern Egypt more than me, because you have been in Egypt in the last 10 years, so many times at depth, and going through the villages, through the churches in Cairo, Alexandria, Aswan. Wow, and talking to Egyptians, Copts, Muslims,
Right.
etc., and making your analysis for your PhD work. And so how the immigration phenomena among the Copts in Egypt, there may be a dozen reasons why the Copts immigrate from Egypt, right?
Right.
And what are the top 3 or 4 reasons for immigration nowadays?
Well, I think that before answering those reasons, we have to kind of think about, village life, or life in the countryside first.
Yeah.
And I have a few pictures that I would love to show, if possible. Let me just... I'll start with a couple before going to the images in an area of Upper Egypt that I worked in over the past year or so. All of these pictures are based on my research between a village in Upper Egypt and the United States. And so these come from people's homes, from churches, etc. And this first picture that I have is the liturgy that I attended, pretty much every Sunday for the past year and a half, where the congregation is heavily of an immigrant community from a very particular area of Upper Egypt. Usually, obviously, people immigrate together to different areas of the United States.
So this is a church in America?
Yes.
In most congregation come from certain area in Upper Egypt.
Yes. So
Okay.
usually when people immigrate, they don't know anybody in the country that they're going to, maybe, except their family members. So obviously they're going to immigrate to the place where they feel that they can create a second home with people that share the same, geographical background, know the same churches that they know in their village, or they go to the same churches, they know the same people. So yeah, each church that you have an immigrant community, most of the time they're from the same area. So this is one of the communities that I worked in and prayed with over the past year and a half.
Studying their immigration experience after they arrived to America.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And we will come to that in part 2 of today's program. And so we go back to Egypt.
Yes.
About what motivates people to migrate, or how the village life look like, and
Right.
yeah.
So I wanted to show this icon that is newly painted in the renovated cathedral in Abbasiyah, because it shows what is happening like right now with not only the Coptic community but particularly the Coptic Orthodox Church, right? That it comes from Egypt but goes out to the rest of the world. And so it's very, symbolic of what has happened over the past 60 years or so. But it also comes with, issues, obviously, that we'll get into. So this picture is from near the village that I worked in Upper Egypt. It's just a beautiful landscape. The next picture.
The next picture, yeah. And yeah, so this is countryside.
Yes.
Okay.
It's gorgeous and just beautiful at sunset.
Is this like the River Nile, or?
This is a tributary of the Nile.
Okay.
Yes. So not the Nile itself.
In some village.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And this is from on top a landscape view of the village that I stayed in and was hosted in. This village has a wonderful history, a rich Coptic history. Large Coptic landowning families lived there. In the early 20th century, they owned an enormous amount of land, outside of this area. And they were very influential. And the reason I find this village to be so interesting is because it really highlights what has happened to Coptic immigration or migration over the past 100 years, with kind of the richest of the rich being able to leave in the 50s and 60s, and then the shifts in immigration thereafter. And particularly the era of immigration that I focus on is from the late 90s until today, but mostly over the past 10 years.
Yeah.
And with that immigration, it's a different, it's just a different level of people from Egyptian society, a different socioeconomic level of Copts coming to the United States through the green card lottery. And so in this village, applying to the green card lottery is something very important every year, that you just kind of roll the dice to try to see if you're going to get it or not. But before talking about that migration, I think it's really important to emphasize that people are still living their lives in this beautiful village that has such a rich history. So this is the landscape. And the next photo that I have is from like the street view of some of the villas, the beautiful villas in this village, that harken back to a time of great prosperity, of economic prosperity in this area. And that's part of the reason why kind of society there was so close-knit, both Muslim and Christian, because of the economic prosperity. But over the past 20 or so years, certain industries have shut their doors there, or have moved, or people have become more interested in education outside of that area. And so it's very interesting to walk into this village and see these beautiful villas, that some of which that are abandoned now because those people have migrated abroad. And I just wanted to show a couple more pictures of kind of the beauty of this village that is still there. This is in a passageway in one of the villas that is just so beautiful. The colors and the history that is there. Many of these villas have been around for more than 100 years. And inside of them, they still have kind of, the old pictures and of, their ancestors that built the village up, and really display kind of the diversity of Coptic life in Upper Egypt. Whereas now many people view Upper Egypt in a very backwards way. I mean, Upper Egypt is really the heart of Egypt. I know that Cairo and Alexandria now are really at the hearts of Egypt, but if you walk into these villas and see this rich history that's there, it's still there.
That existed more than 100 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, more than 100 years ago. But as somebody who studies modern,
by American standards today, these villas are palaces.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And this were Coptic investors, or actually more agricultural landlords,
right.
Who created plantations and farms and farming and schools,
right.
and schools that sent graduates to the university in Cairo.
Absolutely.
At a high level of languages and so on. Participated in the 1919 revolution, and so on.
Yeah, the leader. I mean, if you really think about it, the leaders of modern Egypt, came from Upper Egypt.
Yes.
So it's important to kind of emphasize that that triumph in this geography.
And they had passionate and almost sacred attachment to the soil.
Right. Absolutely.
In contrast to leaders who came from somewhere else.
Right, absolutely. I mean, the next photo that I have is from one of the ceilings of one of the villas. That is just, it's hand painted, so beautiful. And, a lot of these villas, particularly, and I only visited the ones that are owned by the Coptic families. In this village in particular, the Coptic families far surpass the number of the Muslim families. There's one large Muslim family, but the Coptic families are much larger. And so in their homes, they have these beautiful murals of Egypt here, obviously of the pyramids. And it really kind of stands the testament of time, how rich this cultural life was in Upper Egypt, and continues to be today.
You're right.
And the reason I'm showing these photos before I talk about immigration is to say that yes, with immigration, people are immigrating for very particular reasons, but I also want people to know that life is still going on in Upper Egypt, that it's still rich, it's vibrant, and people are very educated, and there's still Coptic and Egyptian culture happening there. So that's the reason I'm going through this before getting to immigration.
But against this background, which of course was glorious in the first half of the 20th century, when Copts were nation builders and promoting education, promoting construction of hospitals, promoting political life, promoting economy, agriculture, factories, and so on. The 1952 revolution, stage one, declined all of the above. 1971 so-called revolution also declined another phase of starting of Islamization and violence against Copts. 2011 revolution, another phase that is so challenging up till now. So why Coptic youth immigrate today?
Well, I would say that there are a couple of reasons, and I'll skip to my slide that shows those applying for the green card lottery. The reason that many youth are applying for the green card lottery or applying to immigrate today, despite this continuation of a very rich, cultural and religious life in Upper Egypt, is because of a number of factors. One of them are global in nature and are influenced by the type of work that is seen to be attractive. And what I mean by that is, if you have a Coptic landowning family that made their money off of agriculture, and their children would usually take up the same thing that their parents are taking up. Now, that agricultural business is becoming less and less attractive for youth, right? They get educated at the schools that are, were some of the first built in this governorate that I worked in, and they want to immigrate to where the colleges are, right? And many of them are in Cairo. So they want to immigrate to the colleges, to the places where these colleges are, to get a better education. And with that better education, there's only so far that they can go in Egypt for certain economic constraints, etc. I'm not saying that this is for everybody, but structurally, this is what people have been pushed to do, both Copts and Muslims. However, when observing those, so in October, I just literally sat in the computer centers of churches in this area and observed people Copts applying for the green card lottery. And I asked them why they were applying. Many of them were young, particularly young families, so maybe they had, a 5-month-old and like a 2-year-old, and they're, thinking about the future of their kids. Most of the answers that I would get is, so why are you applying for this? Were mainly economic opportunity. There are no jobs here. But they would say right after, many of them, there are no jobs here, and it's made even worse because I'm a Copt, because I'm a Christian. And across the board, obviously, there's discrimination at the occupational level for Copts, and that gives them an extra motivating factor to leave. Right. So if the economic situation is bad and I will be discriminated against because of my religion, then I might as well go somewhere that I will be valued. On top of that, though, over the past, let's say, 8 years, there has been increased, obviously, attacks against members of the Coptic communities in Egypt, their congregations and their religious spaces. And this has created a kind of general sense of fear, even if it's unfounded in terms of their local church. I mean, they might be in a remote village, and yet they still fear what might happen.
Who's next?
Yeah, exactly. So I was there in this village at the end of May when the minibus attacks happened. So this was last year.
On the road to the monastery of St. Samuel?
Exactly.
Okay.
And I had arrived in the village that day, and there was a general sense of what are we going to do? I'm in fear of going to any space. What is going to happen next? And at that time, church trips were canceled internally in Egypt, but also, church trips from the United States one of which I was going to participate in July, was canceled. Because, people are going to be using buses, and you never know kind of what will happen with that. And so, on top of the economic stagnation at the local level, and on top of that, with many educated Copts trying to find jobs that are just not there for them, and on top of kind of them being a minority group that is discriminated against, they have to deal with issues of, potential violence.
Yeah. So all of the above gives motivations for people to migrate, and spiritually, they will say, oh, there are Coptic churches around the world. We will not be separated from our heritage. Would that be a comforting thought that removes some of the fear of the unknown in the immigration process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's less of, to be quite honest with you,
yeah.
I think based off of the community that I worked in the United States, that it's less of, it's a mixture of we feel spiritually comfortable in this place, but it's also, this is the community that will help me in this space as a social group. So, your social kind of interactions are mixed with your spiritual ones in different spaces. And this has affected, obviously, and we'll get to this in a little bit, this has affected different communities in the United States, in the LA diocese, as well as in other dioceses, where, it's a clash of different cultures and ways of being Coptic.
Yes. So you interviewed people over the years in Egypt, different cross-sections of society and geographical locations, and you also interviewed people in the United States, from New York to Los Angeles to North and South, and that's part of your PhD work and dissertation writing. So we wish you good luck, and we will tell our viewers that this is part 1, and we'll go to part 2 and part 3 of this episode on the Copts between Egypt and the United States. And now, because of we are in Lent, we will watch the great high priest, Megalos archierefs Iestos Eonas Akranton Ageios Otheos. Christ, the great high priest, forever the pure, the holy, most holy God, played by St. Kirill Choir in London under the direction of Dr. Michael Hinen, and that shows that immigrants come to the diaspora, their children can participate in transferring Coptic civilization, in this case it's music, from Egypt to the diaspora, and even take it to the next level of integrating music with the traditional liturgical hymn. Megalo archierefs.
Oh
Copts between Egypt and the United States. I'm Michael Saad, LogosTV. Our guest today is Candace Lukasik, PhD candidate at Department of Anthropology at University of California, Berkeley. Welcome, Candace.
Thank you.
In part one, we talked about motivations for immigration over the last, and the history and experience of the Copts over the last 100 years, from villages around Egypt. Perhaps first step is to go to and study in Cairo and then Alexandria, and then in the last 50 years go abroad, either for economic reasons or persecution or few other reasons. Can you take us back a little to what's going on in Egypt for a few minutes, and then on this point, the phenomena of immigration, and then we move to what the immigrant, when they come to America, what do they find?
So I just wanted to go to a couple of more slides to talk about the process of applying, and then just map out some statistics before getting into kind of the experience of newcomers in the U.S.
Applying for immigration to the United States,
yes,
while one is in Egypt.
While one is in Egypt.
Okay.
So, for instance, this picture that I have is the whiteboard that people take their pictures for the green card lottery on. And I thought that this was pretty beautiful because obviously Christ is above the whiteboard, you know, blessing each of these people while they're applying, because nobody knows if they will be chosen or not. And you know, watching family member after family member, we're trying to have babies take their picture against this whiteboard, which is pretty funny, trying to get them to focus on the camera. You know, you wonder where, if these people are going to get the green card lottery, like where they'll be in 20, 30, 40 years in the United States. And so this whiteboard was very kind of symbolic of the blankness of, and the possibilities of where these people could go.
So this whiteboard is in a center for helping people to migrate, to fill forms?
Yes, in the church's computer center.
Okay, in some church computer center.
Yes, in some church computer center. And so some churches facilitate the applications into the green card lottery.
Okay.
There are also, and the next picture shows different non-church centers that help immigrants apply for the green card lottery, both Muslims and Christians. And so this was taken in Cairo, in a working class suburb of Cairo, you know, during around the time when it's the green card lottery, and you know, you just go and kind of roll the dice if you're going to be able to come to the United States or not. So these signs are everywhere in very particular neighborhoods. And so that being said, I wanted to, you know, outline kind of some of the immigration statistics for Egyptians coming to the United States based off of some of the numbers that we have available. And so according to the Migration Policy Institute, there are 248,000 Copts living in the United States as of 2013. That could have increased a lot since 2013 until now, 2018. But we'll just kind of take that as face value as the number that we have now available.
Right.
According to Pew Research, who has their hands on some raw data of the immigrants in the Egyptian immigrants in the United States, they have noted that 75% of the Egyptian population in the United States is Egyptian Christian and 25% Egyptian Muslim.
That's a contrast to the ratio in Egypt.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And so kind of thinking about those dynamics are very interesting. And then in terms of the green card lottery, I wanted to note, because I thought that these numbers would be of great interest to those studying the effects of the green card lottery on their churches, their home churches in the United States, that between 2013 and 2015, 763,701 Egyptians applied to the green card lottery in Egypt, according to the State Department. And in 2015, so they have the records for 2015 only now, 4,988 Egyptians were selected from Egypt alone for the green card lottery.
Almost 50% chance.
No, that's 4,000.
Oh, 4,000.
4,000, yes.
Oh, sorry.
So
okay.
it's a small chance still.
It's 5%.
It's a small chance
almost,
still.
yeah.
But those that end up getting the green card lottery can also bring their dependents with them as well. And then eventually apply for the rest, like other family members. And in 2014, that number was even higher. So it fluctuates depending on the year. But it's to note that Egypt, among all the countries that have the green card lottery as an option, that are able to apply, Egypt is one of the countries that has the highest number of awardees. And that has been pretty standard for over the past 5 to 6 years. And so that says a lot. In terms of...
Is that an executive order from American government?
No, that's actually a law that was passed in the early to mid-90s. And that's what's being debated right now on immigration in the United States, is to do away with the green card lottery.
Right.
And I know that this is a debate within the Coptic community itself to get rid of it or not. But it's just to note that those that are benefiting from the green card lottery, many of them are Egyptian Christians, Copts. So in thinking about this debate, I think that understanding that this community is also a part of that debate, very much a part of that debate, is important. So yeah.
So now they migrate to the United States. And then what do you find when you interviewed people around the United States? New immigrants, old immigrants?
So I have a couple of kind of fun photos from Copts in America. What I've noticed...
What is this, a bumper sticker?
This is a bumper sticker.
Okay.
I am proud to be a Coptic on somebody's car. And I thought it was really interesting, and so I wanted to take a picture of it. I mean, driving to liturgy on a Sunday is very interesting because many people in the area that I live in have, some signs on their cars that they're Coptic, whether it's a Coptic cross or, Coptic name. So it's very interesting. You can identify who is who. Also by kind of the cross, the type of cross that's hanging in their rearview mirror. So it's very interesting to kind of think about how Copts mark themselves in the United States context. So at least in the United States, and in the church, the parish that I did my research in, some of the struggles that many of these newcomers face is, really a sense of, isolation and from their family members maybe back home. If they were awarded the green card lottery, they do have their families here. But there are also some people who apply for asylum that don't have their families here for long, long periods of time. And it's heartbreaking to see how, you can be separated from your husband or your wife for 3, 4, 5 years. That's a long period of time and a big sacrifice to make for the future of your family, or your future and your future family. And so some of the kind of the struggles that these people go through are very much, cultural struggles. You're dealing with a new culture. You might be in the same, church as your fellow congregants, and you might believe theologically in the same things, but the way that you experience the church life, the way you experience your environment is completely different, and that leads to some issues. Whether those issues be cultural in terms of how you speak to your children, how you treat your children, how you look, how you dress, how you present yourself in public, in school. Some churches have provided assistance in that way to show their congregants, their new congregants, what is right and what is wrong in the United States context. Whether they bring in, police officers to speak to them about law enforcement in the United States, even FBI, social workers. So there's a variety of services that the church provides for this community to be able to thrive. But it presents a lot of challenges to the churches more broadly.
Did you experience or observe in these communities in America the spirit of this is a religious duty for the old immigrants or the established church, meaning clergy, deacons, boards, Sunday school teachers, to go beyond the call of duty, go the extra mile, like the Good Samaritan, to help the new immigrants? Or it varies from church to church, or did you make a point of observing variations?
Yeah,
Of course, I'm talking about your academic, scientific analysis as part of your study of a social phenomena.
Right. Well, in terms of an academic analysis, I worked in one community very closely.
Okay.
But personally, obviously, in traveling across the United States and doing interviews, etc., I have, previously, up until the past year, in working with this community in this particular area, I, have noticed that it varies. It varies based off of parish. It varies based off of diocese. But I think that for the community that I worked in, there was such a huge influx of immigrants over the past 8 years that it is just very hard. It hit these communities very hard because these people they need social things. They need assistance in finding housing. They need assistance in finding a job. They need financial assistance. So it's a lot on a particular community, in not only on the congregation but also pastorally on the clergy members. Yeah. It's a lot for them to deal with problems of many of the second generation or Coptic Americans, those youth that were born here and grew up here their whole lives, and they might be in their 20s. They have different needs than these new immigrants that are coming from very rural areas of Upper Egypt and throughout Egypt.
The needs of the second generation, those who were born here or came from Egypt at young age, and now they are in their teenager or 20s, they have tremendous needs, spiritual needs, that the clergy are really unable to cope with that group and that group because they are fewer clergy than what it takes, what it needs. And although we have laity who are very active, proactive, they dedicate lots of time after their 40 hours of work a week to earn a living. They also volunteer many hours in varieties of services like clinics, like tutoring, like take a newcomer to the driver's license office, to a hospital, social security, etc., etc. And so the harvest is plenty and workers are few.
Right.
And that's a dire need in America that is not. There is no simplistic approach to resolving it. But your analysis?
Well, I would say that there is kind of the ideal of thinking about the church, which is it's the gathering place for Copts in the diaspora.
Right.
Period.
Yeah.
There are no social institutions that Copts gather outside of. I mean, even if they're not participating in liturgy, and forgive me for saying that, but even if they're not participating in liturgy, they're going to go to the church for social interaction, because
Right.
those are their friends and fellow Egyptians.
Right.
And I think that in understanding their needs as different than the needs of those in the second generation, there needs to be an understanding that while they're both attending the same church or gathering at the same place, that should have one vision, or the clerical administration would like to have one vision. It's very hard when you have different motivations for
Right.
being in that place. And if you can imagine kind of how different the communities are here, think about having one church between Egypt and the U.S. context. It's very hard to think about kind of the oneness of this institution. And so what I find very interesting is the ways in which people try to make do with what they have.
Yeah.
Because of the circumstances over the past 8 years with the increased immigration.
Yeah.
Things just needed to happen the way that they needed to happen. What servants could do, what youth could do, what other members of the community could do for these newcomers, they did as much as they could. And there was a lot of strain placed on the clergy to provide pastoral care, but also to be a mediator for
Right.
these families,
Yeah.
to be the counselor, to be the educator as to what is proper, as an example, in a marriage in the United States. This is proper, this is not proper for the American social context. This is a lot of strain on
Right.
the clergy and on the laity in general, financial, social, and spiritual.
Right. Can there be complementary efforts? In other words, the new waves of migration also help enrich the pre-existing immigrants and second generation. One idea came to mind now is if I have a second generation that are not engaged in ministry, and therefore they are not proactive members of the church, if we invite them to become helpers of the newcomers, like tutoring, like taking people to the driver's license office, like hospitals, helping the new immigrant learn the accent and the language, and so on. So you benefit both. You convert a group that perhaps are not engaged in ministry because there is not identified need for them. Now the need is identified, and you can invite them to be of help, and so on. It's just a thought. I hope it's not simplistic.
I think that it is.
Tell me if it's simplistic.
No, not simplistic. I think that it is ideal. However, I think that in many cases, at least in the community that I worked in intimately, again, I don't know other dioceses very well,
Yes.
and if this is a program there, but at least in the community that I worked in, the reality is much different than the ideal.
Right.
And so many in the second generation, and what I mean by that is, I mean when you say second generation, it is, could be a variety of different social spectrums.
Right.
What I'm saying by second generation, and those that identify as Americans or Coptic Americans, are those youth that were born and raised here in the church, could have been in the church, or as a deacon or just a participant, a congregant, but they grew up here in an American cultural context, some of which, this really surprised me in my research, but some of these youth have never been to Egypt before in their lives. Never been to Egypt before in their lives. And to expect them to understand kind of the social context that these new immigrants are coming from, and how, and kind of interact with them on their terms, is not only very difficult, but also it doesn't take into account the problems, the specific problems that Coptic American youth are facing growing up in American society.
Right. Yeah.
They have different priorities that they're interested in pursuing, whether that be through a stronger dedication to their Orthodox Christian faith, and less so on their Egyptian cultural identity, or that being their kind of desire to form a church community based off of their needs and not necessarily the conditions that their church happens to be in. They want to take the initiative. They want to be a part of boards. They want to be a part of the vision of what their church will be in the future. So that's what I've experienced.
Right. So what are the challenges for the second generation in America today? Do we have the whole spectrum from, I'll tell you what I have seen and written about and brought to this program. We have second generation who went to Kenya to preach the gospel and serve the local community. We have second generation who created websites for Coptic liturgical hymns. We have second generations who went to study theology at local seminaries around America. We have second generation who dedicate their free time to learn liturgical hymns and sing them in the church as deacons. We have second generation who work as Sunday school teachers. We have second generation who take themselves and others to retreats. So we have amazing second generation. But in that second generation also we have the other end of the spectrum. We have drug addicts. We have failures in education. We have people who do not go to church except once a year. Perhaps the same way it was in Egypt 100 years ago in Alexandria or Cairo. There was also that kind of spectrum. So now we have a first generation and a second generation struggling with their own life and spirituality, and a new immigrating wave which has their own struggles and spirituality. But I believe there could be a magic that combine the both and make them one in the Holy Spirit, one in Christ, one in the church, the body of Christ, through its idealism, through it is maybe a little naive, or at least it requires struggle and hard work, not just wishful thinking, or sitting here on LogosTV and making assumptions and suggestions like myself doing now. It needs hard work. It may need 24/7 hard work from dedicated people. And again, the harvest is plenty, but workers are few. So ask the Lord of the harvest to send the workers to his harvest, right? So what can you tell us in a concluding remark on this section, part 2 of this program?
Well, I would say that in terms of Egypt,
yes.
So let's think about concluding a remark on both Egypt and the U.S. context.
Yes.
In Egypt, because my previous work for my master's was set in Cairo with members of the Maspero Youth Union and other Coptic political organizations, and Coptic youth ministries. So I did work with the youth bishopric, etc. It was really focused on the youth after the revolution. We need to be aware that the spectrum is also there in Egypt as well.
Exactly, yeah.
The spectrum is there. Again, in the village, on the village level, it's different.
Yeah.
In Cairo and Alexandria, the Coptic youth there are different than the Coptic youth in Upper Egypt, not because of anything natural, but it's because of the environment. The village is a small area, and there's not the congregating spaces like there is in Cairo. But that being said, the spectrum is there, and it varies based off of geography. So when you have populations from very rural areas of Upper Egypt, with some people that are very educated and others that are not so educated, some of which can't even read or write Arabic. I mean, it's a fact, that come to the United States and are intermixed with these communities where you have these American Coptic youth that are of a completely different context. Yes, they also do have the spectrum, but what is different is that in Egyptian society, the people that they are kind of thinking about themselves in opposition to, just, we construct our identities based off of who we are not, right? Who they're in opposition to in Egypt a lot of the time has to either be Muslims or other Christian sects. At the end of the day, that's what they're in opposition to. In the United States, it's a different context.
Right, yeah.
It's a different context,
yeah.
And the youth here don't operate off of that paradigm from Egypt. Who they are not is not the same here, is not the same as it is in Egypt.
Yeah.
And so the youth here are speaking to those that are maybe atheists, secularists, and working with other Christian partners for Christianity in a way that they're not in Egypt, right? So there are a variety of different factors in the U.S. context that leads those American Coptic youth here that grow up here to have different needs and ideas of being Coptic Orthodox than those from
And
Egypt.
that will bring us to part 3 of this program, which is about Coptic identity, orthodoxy in the United States as something not only to preserve but also to enjoy. So our viewers, you have been with part 2 of Coptic civilization episode today on Copts between Egypt and the United States. I'm Michael Saad. Now we will watch St. Kirill Choir from London performing Migalo. We heard part one of Migalo at the beginning of this part 2 of the program today. Now we will hear part 2 of Migalo. Migalo Arshi Erefs, which is a liturgical hymn sung during Lent after the Synaxarion, because Christ, the words are Christ, the great high priest, forever, the pure, the holy, the most holy God. Welcome to Coptic Civilization at LogosTV. I'm Michael Saad. Our episode today on the Copts between Egypt and America and the immigration experience, their life in Egypt. We covered it in part 1. The coming to the United States and the challenges there in part 2. And now part 3, we are talking about Coptic identity in the diaspora. Our guest today is Candace Lukasik. Welcome, Candace.
Thank you.
Candace is a PhD candidate at University of California in Berkeley. And also she has the insider view and the outsider view combined, having adopted Coptic Orthodoxy a few years ago, and with her education, master's from Columbia University, and visiting and PhD now in effort in UC Berkeley, along with maybe 10 times visited Egypt in the last 10 years.
Oh, probably 15.
15 times visited Egypt in 10 years. That's about 15 times more than I did. And each time you went to the villages, to the streets of Cairo, to the villages in Upper Egypt, Alexandria, Aswan, you entered home, you interacted with Coptic youth, especially the Maspero youth group, and you interviewed people in Egypt and people in America around Coptic churches, from New Jersey and New York area to Los Angeles, where we are now. So, can you take us from your, because this is the topic of your PhD dissertation.
Yes.
So there is lots of analysis, academic authority, not just people thinking casually or in a social conversation, but this is an analysis and reviews that professors who are experts in the field are going to examine, and you have to defend your dissertation before a committee of experts in anthropology, in history, sociology, political science. So we want to get your outsider view of what do you see in Coptic identity in the diaspora? Is it, and by the way, when we talk about Coptic identity, I want to alert the viewers to the 2 pictures on the wall. They are from Saint Mina Coptic Orthodox Church in Colton or Riverside County, California. And look at the architecture from outside, an aerial view on the left, and the camera horizontal view on the right. And as you notice, it is built you can take 2 ways of looking at it. Either it's Noah's Ark sitting on the ground before being raised by water. So it's like a ship in one view, or looks also like the tabernacle, the tabernacle, the tent that was carried from Sinai to the Promised Land by the Hebrews and Moses the prophet. And so this represents some kind of Coptic identity in this architecture. Also inside this church there are icons painted by the master iconographer, Dr. Isaac Fanous. And we see one of them in the back of my guest, Candace. Behind her on the screen there is the painting of the Last Supper, and also some woodwork in the church. So this church in particular, by the way, I have it in my book chapter here in this book, Coptic Civilization. The editor is Dr. Gaudat Gabra, and chapter 21 is about Coptic civilization in the diaspora. And I encourage you to buy this book from Amazon.com or any other organization. It's available in Egypt because it's American University in Cairo Press. And it has fantastic 21 chapters about Coptic literature, Coptic art, Coptic architecture, Coptic iconography, Coptic language, 21 chapters at different aspects of Coptic civilization. So all of these aspects describe Coptic identity. What did you, our honored guest, indeed I'm honored to have you on my program, what do you see and how do you analyze Coptic identity actualization in the diaspora?
Well, I'm going to kind of go back to my pictures a little bit to visualize this a little bit more. So the first picture that I have is from a vigil or a demonstration after the bombings on Palm Sunday earlier last year. So this is
in Alexandria and Tanta.
Right.
You're right.
Right. Yeah. And so this was from that vigil or that demonstration, and you have the American and the Egyptian flag there with the palms, and also the liturgy from that was being prayed at that time. Or no, it wasn't liturgy, but there was some service happening that they broadcast on speakers.
In the street?
In the street.
Which city is that?
I can't be too specific, but let's just say
on the East Coast?
Yes, it's on the East Coast.
Yeah.
So the reason that I emphasize this is to show kind of the ways in which Coptic identity have been brought together in the U.S. context around the recent incidents that have happened in Egypt with Copts there, certain bombings and attacks that have happened, and how different communities in the U.S. context have responded to those. So many of these people that came to this vigil or demonstration are either new immigrants or part of the first generation. So they're older. Many of them are in their late 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And they speak in Arabic, right, during the demonstrations and the vigils, etc. And there's very much an emphasis on connecting Egypt as a country to the U.S. And what the needs of this community, the Coptic community, are in these times of crisis. The next photo that I have is from a demonstration that happened in September in front of the United Nations around the Egyptian delegation and the speech of Egyptian President Sisi at the UN. Many people, both Coptic and Muslim, came out to support the Egyptian president. And what was very interesting is kind of the demographics of who was there. This gentleman, is a very sweet gentleman, was just in the United States visiting his son from a remote village. He's from a remote village, and the whole time that he was in the United States for 2 weeks, he wore his galabeya, in the streets, right? And
Egyptian identity.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And he's somebody he actually is somebody who works in the fields. He works in the fields.
Yes.
His hands
who puts food on our table.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to kind of show those two images of first generation and new immigrants that are engaged in kind of activism or a remembrance of their Coptic identity through their national identity in Egypt, with another photo from a more Coptic American or Coptic or first generation Coptic youth crowd. Again, after what happened in Alexandria and Tanta Palm Sunday last year, in April of last year, there was a vigil organized by many Coptic youth in the area. It was obviously in English. There was a prayer ceremony outside of the church in English for the martyrs. And if you look at the bottom of the picture, it says, "We do not worship the relics of the martyrs, but honor them in our worship of him." And so it's very much connecting to the Copts of Egypt in their spiritual, their religious lives through the church, and adding martyrs to the church. So it's not to say that the first kind of strategies of engagement with Coptic identity are not engaging these narratives, but it's very much about thinking of these martyrs, those that were killed in these bombings, through an Egyptian national perspective, whereas many of these youth think about that through their faith, their Coptic Orthodox faith. And the next slide shows a remembrance ceremony for the Arba'in, or the 40 days after the Botroseya bombings in December of 2016. There was a ceremony, a remembrance ceremony that took place as well, again, mostly in English, many Coptic American youth that participated, and also many first generation as well. But it was an engagement with the community. Politicians were invited, American politicians were invited to speak and to give their condolences to the Coptic community. And so in kind of thinking about the variations of what being Coptic means through these incidents that happen in Egypt to other members of the church community there, you kind of see the variation within the community, and how sometimes it comes together in certain ways, and sometimes it doesn't come together, whether it's kind of the emphasis more on Orthodox identity or national identity.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's if I may, again, make a suggestion, because we are concerned about the interaction and how the new immigrants and the old immigrants can help each other actualize their spiritual life. In the pictures that you just showed me, this particular one, we can keep the second generation youth disengaged by bringing only the deacons who are already proactive members of the church, and tell them, organize this event. And so they organized about what they learn best, which is the wonderful liturgical hymns that we just showed to the viewers. And we show on this program always, like St. Kirill Choir. That's one thing. But I'm suggesting that to engage other youth who cannot have the talent or the investment in learning these liturgical hymns, in such occasion, bring mixed choir of boys and girls to sing something for the community. This is not a liturgical service. This is a community spiritual event. You are inviting non-Copts to come and speak, like the mayor of the village, for example, and offer condolences and sympathy. And that's a great thing to do from the purpose even of evangelism. So in this occasion, give opportunity or responsibility, actually, to the youth who are disfranchised from the church, who have no responsibility in the church, and therefore they don't go as frequent, or they go once a year, or they don't feel that they are welcome, or whatever. Give them a responsibility of organizing the program for this event. They can work as Boy Scouts, as ushers, organizing the event, as publicity secretaries, writing about the event to local newspapers. I can tell you 20 things that young people can be engaged in such event. Instead of just doing run-of-the-mill, the usual thing that we know best to do in the last 2,000 years. Make something to engage the generation, the youth, so they feel they actualize their Coptic identity.
Right.
They absorb Coptic spirituality. They feel integrated in the community and integrate both the new immigrants and the old immigrants in this event, have a social after, make it so organized, no double parking in the street, put 20 people in the parking lot to prevent double parking. So you get Americanized, which is not a bad word, by the way. You get people absorb the good things about American culture. How about that?
Well, actually, the next slide that I have,
Okay.
I'll mention kind of more broadly something that happened during this night.
Okay.
So this was during the St. Mary's fast. And obviously there are processions that happen right in the evening. And so this picture shows one of the processions that happened around the building that we were in. And interestingly enough, during this evening, there were two separate services being held. One in the bottom chapel in Arabic, and the top chapel in English. And without getting into too many details, there was definitely a sense of separation between the two communities.
Although this event can be a focal point for integration.
Right, right.
But they converted it into separation.
Right, well, I think...
Or they didn't think enough, plan enough.
I think that people really underestimate the importance of language. For many Coptic American youth, yeah, they might speak a little bit of Arabic, but they are not at the same level as many of these people.
Right.
And they just don't think in Arabic.
Right, yeah.
It's a different way of understanding not only your faith, but culturally, the people that are around you. It's completely different, and it has an effect on the way that people engage their spiritual lives as Orthodox Christians. So that's why you have a lot of youth that are very much trying to engage their orthodoxy and emphasize their orthodoxy rather than their Copticness, right? So it has been said to me that that Copts are Orthodox first and foremost, right? Orthodox is the ice cream, and Coptic is the flavor of the ice cream, right? But it's still ice cream. And I think that for many Coptic American youth, they are getting very bogged down with the flavor, the over-flavorizing of the ice cream, and not getting to kind of the quality of the ice cream itself. I know I'm taking this analogy too far, but it's to say that that's what Coptic American youth are really concerned about, is the quality of our orthodoxy above the engagement of our Coptic way of orthodoxy. What is more important? And
St. Paul answered the question. He said, I would rather pray a few words in which I understand with my brain than thousands of words that perfect prophecy, but nobody will benefit from them. So St. Paul said, speak English.
Right.
Didn't he? I mean, if I may translate what he said. He said, pray in English.
Right.
And the new immigrants would welcome English because that's their new life. So they pick one word every day. They become also beautifully Americanized, beautifully prayerful in English, so that they can also integrate with their own children who in few years will not speak to them.
Right.
in Arabic.
Right.
They will not laugh with them in Arabic.
Right. And, you know, and I think that, and I'll give you an example of a family from the village that I work in Upper Egypt. I visited them in the area that they live in the United States at home. And I had a meal with them a few weeks ago. And their daughter, who came here when she was 1 year old, so now she's 9, they came here 8 years ago. Their daughter speaks very broken Arabic. And, you know, when I ask her who her friends are at school, she doesn't give me any Coptic names, but rather she gives me, you know, this girl from Algeria, or this girl from Pakistan, or this girl from Puerto Rico, or these are her friends. And so when we think about kind of the next decades from now, what the generations of Coptic Americans will look like, we need to also, you know, think about, be very careful in thinking about how we're engaging youth now.
Right.
And in what ways.
Like including Sunday school, for example.
Right.
They have to teach in English, help the newcomer adopt the English language, because when they help them with liturgical words, vocabulary in English, they are helping their future. They are helping their spiritual future. Otherwise, in a couple of years, these kids will go astray because they have no cement in the English Coptic liturgy.
Right.
No cement in Coptic identity at the intellectual level that keep them for the rest of their life.
But just to kind of end my point, and I just wanted to mention one more thing before we conclude too. I want us to also maybe think about, for many Coptic American youth, what's important for them is that they are Orthodox Christians.
Yes.
Not necessarily Coptic Orthodox Christians. So in the coming kind of generations, in thinking about what is important, is the faith important? Is the cultural identity important? That will be kind of the next debates that will happen.
Right.
Not just Egyptian cultural identity and American cultural identity, but what is orthodoxy mean for these communities? So.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Could I mention just one more project?
I was going to ask you.
Okay, great.
Yeah, please, for a concluding remark.
Yes. So I just wanted to mention one very important project happening in the diaspora.
Yes.
By a Coptic Canadian youth. The Coptic Canadian History Project was started by Michael Akladios of York University.
Michael Akladios was born in Egypt but came here around age 8, and he's doing great work in Canada at York University.
Yes.
I was happy to meet him and admire his work. And you tell us about the project, please.
Yeah, so I won't say too much, but this is the mission statement of the project that maybe viewers can just skim through. But the main aspect of the project is to really preserve the experiences of Coptic populations and immigrants in Canada, but also Canadian or Coptic immigrants generally in North America as well. And so they accept kind of archival donations, you know, which would be very important for those Copts at home that have any, you know, historical material. The Coptic Canadian History Project is one that would be a safe bet for them to preserve what they have for future generations, so people can see kind of the vibrancy of Coptic life both in Egypt and here. And I'll just leave viewers with the website if they wanted to check it out for themselves.
Yeah, I agree with you. This is a wonderful project, and we can do it in a couple of universities around America. Dr. Aziz Suryal Atiyah did something like that at University of Utah. But we, as Copts, we lost contact with that project. I keep communicating with the group there, but none of them is a Copt anymore. There used to be some Copts. but not anymore. But these are all treasures, and our own history and identity, and we can trace back all of the above. So thank you so much, Candace, for being our guest today and enlightening us with academic authority, academic analysis about the Coptic immigration experience under the title of today, Copts between Egypt and the United States.
Thank you so much for having me.
And good luck with your PhD dissertation, and we will we plan to invite you here again to this after you can reveal your dissertation in detail.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Our viewers, thank you so much for watching our program, Coptic Civilization. As usual, I encourage you to call the number on the screen or go to the website, www.logoschannel.com, and please consider LogosTV in your tithing so that this kind of programs and similar or better programs that are presented on LogosTV, you enjoy them, and the whole Coptic world enjoy them, because especially in Egypt, this is received, the LogosTV is received across Egypt via satellite, but also around the world on Facebook live and on YouTube. This episode will go also on YouTube and also repeated from time to time on the air. Thanks for watching LogosTV. I'm Michael Saad.